are we going to be talking about today? What subject matter are we going to be looking at today? Well, I've done a ton of videos over the last 25 years. Uh, I'd say, I don't know, 3,000, something like that, or more. And I get a knee jerk reaction from people who disagree with the fact that someone who is here illegally has rights and that there's things they can do to fix their status. It's all basically the same comment over the years. Granted, it's gotten more direct since Trump's been in office, but uh, the gist of it is they came here illegally, just deport them. I mean that's the bottom line. Okay, and I want to explain that that's not the way the law works. That might be their opinion, okay? If they're giving an opinion that, in fact, they think anybody who comes here illegally should be deported, that's fine. That's their opinion. That's First Amendment rights. I have no problems with that. But when they get into the area where they're stating that that is the law, that they came here illegally and they must be deported, well, that's where I have to jump in and correct them because that's not the law. Okay. And we don't live in an anarchy. Uh, I was going to, I want to say we don't live in a fascist society, but it's turning into that. But that's for another subject or another day. We live in a democracy that has laws, and there are lots of laws and regulations and statutes and cases that benefit and show how an illegal immigrant can obtain legal status and what they need to do to apply for it. Now, these are not just opinions. These are not just pulled out of thin air. These are laws which were passed by the Congress of the United States and signed into law by the president over, decades. Okay. And granted it changes and some, when they apply, they win, some they lose. But that's not the point of this. Because let's say someone comes here illegally and they apply for asylum. Well, the law allows them to do that. If they fall under one of the 5 enumerated areas of asylum, political asylum, religious, nationality, social group, so forth. And it allows them to do that, even though they're here illegally, even though they entered illegally, or even though, their status has expired. It allows it. Now, allowing someone to apply for something doesn't mean automatically it'll be approved. Okay? That's different. That's not what I'm stating here. I'm not stating that everybody who is here illegally should be able to stay here legally and should be able to get the green card and ultimately become a citizen. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the law allows them to apply under certain circumstances for certain forms of relief. Now, whether they win or whether they lose, that's a whole different story. There's a lot of people who apply for asylum that lose. Okay. And then, sure, they need to either appeal it or do a petition for review or do something else or get voluntary departure or leave the United States. Yes. But if they win, and I'm talking, just as an example, asylum, if they win, then a year later, they can apply for adjustment of status and get the green card, even though they were here illegally. Okay. That's what I'm saying. So I'll give you some more examples. Somebody comes here, let's say they come here legally, but then they overstay and ultimately they get married to a US citizen. Well, the law allows them to adjust status even though they have no legal status at the time because they entered legally. Now, let's say in that exact example, let's say that they enter illegally, what we call iwi, entering without inspection. And later they fall in love and marry a U.S. citizen or even a lawful permanent resident. They still, under the law, are allowed to apply to see if they can obtain residency. Now, they may not qualify, and they probably don't qualify for adjustment of status, but they can apply for consulate processing. They can then apply for a provisional waiver of inadmissibility where, they've been out of status for a certain number of months or years. And so this provisional waiver, if it's granted, will allow them to leave, go to the consulate, and then not be subject to the 10-year bar, get the green card, and then come back. So you see, even in that example, whether they entered legally or illegally and then fell out of status, there's procedures available for them to obtain legal status. Even people who commit crimes, because I have people who say, well, they entered illegally, they committed crimes, they must be deported. But that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes they should be deported. Agreed. But let's say they commit a crime that's not an aggravated felon, and let's say they had their green card, and let's say they're put in removal proceedings, or deportation proceedings where the government tries to deport them. They may qualify for cancellation of removal for lawful permanent residence. Okay, that depends on various factors, but a lot of people will qualify for that. Let's say that they don't have any crime, but they're put into removal proceedings, and let's say that they entered illegally and they have no status at all. They may be able to qualify for cancellation of removal for non-permanent residents. Okay? There's different waivers that are available for all kinds of stuff that makes people unlawful or inadmissible. Okay. They might have committed fraud upon entering using someone else's green card. They might have committed crimes. They may have an infectious disease. They may not be able to make enough money. Okay. There's all kinds of reasons that people may be inadmissible. And it doesn't always have to be for the green card. There's what's called the 212D3 waiver for non-immigrants if they're inadmissible. Okay. So the point is that there are lots of laws on the books. These laws weren't written by liberals, weren't signed by liberals. Okay, that's not how it works. It went through Congress, it was signed by the president, and it's law. Okay, if somebody or a bunch of people disagree with it, they can try to repeal the law. Okay. But assuming there's no repealing of that particular section, then people can apply, whether they're here legally or illegally. Asylum, cancellation, adjustment, waivers, registry, TPS, U visa. Okay. Various ones where they're victims of crime. Okay. T visa or trafficking. The reason that all these laws exist is because we in the United States don't just say, get out to anybody who walks in who's not a U.S. citizen. I mean, the administration's trying to do that now. Clearly, they're trying to do that, even with people who are U.S. citizens. But the law is the law. And as long as we follow the law, then those people who came here illegally, if they fall under one of these sections, they can apply and ultimately get status, get the green card, sometimes get what's called withholding of removal or convention against torture relief, which isn't the green card, but then they're not deported. Okay. So I'm listing all kinds of stuff, and there's a lot more. Believe me, there's a lot more. But the bottom line moral of this story is just because somebody enters illegally, they do not and should not automatically be deported like a lot of people think. Okay, there's the law that may, in their estimation, get in the way, but it is the law, and that's what we follow in the United States. Okay? All right, everybody have a good day.